I'm Matt Price,
I'm Jack O'Neill, and behind the camera is Michael Konle.
and we're interviewing my grandpa, Jake Price.
Hello there, I'm Jake.
So, Grandpa, tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I had a wonderful childhood. Lived on the lake during the summer and a beautiful city during the winter. The summers I loved, the winters were a task to get through. But during the summer we had, at young childhood, we had a little rowboat that we turned into a sailboat. So I got early into sailing. And then I was fortunate enough to have a pony, and we had a country atmosphere that my buddies and we got up at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we just took off to the wilderness and chased all over the place. And how we lived, we don't know. In fact, I had one situation 2 years old where I was wandering around at a party next door and fell off the pier, and fortunately somebody saw me laying down there on the bottom of the lake. So part of my life, this brings up, is a lot of things that comes around, goes around. And 16 years later, I was able to pull somebody out of the pool while I was working at a resort down in Biloxi, Mississippi. And that was my first real endeavor out into the world. I'd just gotten out of high school and wanted to see what the world was like. Took off. My dad had just died. My mother didn't quite know what to do with a strong-headed kid, so she had me stay with my uncle for a little bit. But in the meantime, they put me in a brand new 1952 Chevy, and decided I might as well use it, and went on the first trip. One of my buddies, a guy by the name of Ron Fernrohr, I was not quite 17 yet, and he was just 16, and we decided to, well, first of all, we were working at a custard stand, Kilty out in the Conwalk. We were as short order cooks, and in the middle of the summer we decided we should retire. So we took off, got in my nice new car, and headed south. And to this day I don't know how his parents let him do that, and I don't know how my mother let me do it, but we just took off. Went, visited friends on the way down in Kentucky, stayed with some friends in Bradenton, Florida, then over to Miami with aunt and uncle of mine, and then up to New York City to visit an uncle of his, and got into New York City. We parked the car and hailed a cab. For $20, we had a 4-hour tour of New York by this cab driver. Just fantastic. This was well, we were 16, so in around 50, 53. And then his uncle was a VIP in the stock market, and we got a chance to tour the New York Stock Exchange, which I enjoyed very much. Then we came home, and I had another uncle that had a hotel in Port Huron, which we had a night there with him, and got home, and it was almost a 3 or 4 week trip, and then get back into school. The next summer, I got a job training horses. A little horse farm nearby. I had horses, the pony and the horses before this, and that was one of my horses, and sailing was my true love at that time. And then at the end of the summer, is when I took this trip down to Biloxi to work at this resort. And because I've been around horses, I thought I'd get a job with horses. ended up, I got a job as a lifeguard and working at a resort when you're just 17 years old is quite an education. We're about an hour from New Orleans, and I went over there quite a bit. And then guests wanted to go over there, so I would taking tours to New Orleans. And so I got to know the South and still enjoy the South a lot. After that, I was still at the resort. As the world turns, one of the guests there cornered me one day, and he said, "Are you Sylvester Price's son?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, what the hell are you doing here?" And my dad had a very large construction company and ironworking business, and in Milwaukee here, built the Riverside Theater, the Grand Avenue, and the bridges and across the Cross, and they were the only, he started the business in 1915, and they were the only steel erector in the Milwaukee area for until into the late 20s. And then when I was born in 34, I was a great help. I helped end the recession, that was going on back then. And I think my mother did too. So anyway, he's the one. He talked me into going back home and going to Europe with my mother, which I hadn't really wanted to do because most of my friends were not Europe type. And anyways, he talked me into it, and that ended that part of my life. I had my saddles in my car, and well, I got to break off here because one of the interesting stories that I had in Biloxi, when I first got there, I came in town, had this brand new car, and had my mother's charge card for gas, but I really didn't have any money. And got to the station, and I needed gas, and I happened to talk to the guy and said, "I need a job so I can get some money." And he says, "Well, this is your brother's card." He said, "You want me to put an extra cash on there?" So he did. The guy's name was Specs. This is just an old guy in a service station. Well, when I went to, he took a liking to me, and I'd go down and visit with him once in a while after I got this job. And one day he said, "Go home and get dressed up." He said, "I got some people I want you to meet." And okay, so I went home, got the suit on and everything, and came back down. This big black limousine comes driving in, and all guys in their black suits, and he takes me out there and puts me in the passenger seat, and they take off and they introduce themselves, and what they were the owners of all the different restaurants and bars and gambling houses around town. And they were giving me a tour of all these places, and they offered me a job. I'm 17 years old, 220 pounds, 6 foot. So I was pretty good size, but when they offered me this job, I said, "I don't know too much about your business, but I said, what a little bit I know is once you're in it, you can't get out. So, no, thank you." So I got out of they took me back, and I was there for, maybe another month or so. And every time I went to a restaurant or a bar, never picked up a tab. Everything was taken care of me every time I went someplace. So then I got out of there, went to, Specs had one more mission for me. Wanted me to stop in Houston to see a friend of his. A guy, my name was Sam Maceo. He said, "Go to the biggest hotel in Houston and go up to the desk and ask for Sam Maceo." So I got there and went up to the desk and asked for Sam Maceo. And the guy looked at me and said, "He was shot this morning, sir." I got back in the car and I ran like hell to the next town. Got into a coffee shop and found out that San Maceo was the head gangster in town, in Texas and everything. So he would, so Specs had put me onto another one. Now this goes around. Years later, I get a job at Safeway Steel Products after, or I wanted to be into advertising, by the way, I forgot that part. And I had several different advertising jobs. But what I was looking forward to was to get a good advertising manager's job, and I was with an outfit by the name of Butler Paper prior to Safeway, and my job there was to entertain people. Every day I took people out to lunch, and I'd go to meetings at night, and my job was to buy the bar for everybody. I was the most popular guy in town. That lasted for a year and a half, got burned out. But got the, before I left there, I found out that Safeway was finally hiring somebody. Went for an interview there, and they had like 50 applicants. And a couple of weeks later, I stopped in, or maybe a month later, to see how I was doing. Went to the vice president, and he says, well, he said, you came in number 2. And I looked at him and I said, well, how long have you been with the company? He said, 4 months. I said, sir, this is your first fucking mistake. And he just got up and he said, oh, that deserves lunch. So he took me to lunch and we got to know each other. To make a long story short, ended up with a job. Now, circling back to Biloxi, my first assignment was I had to put on a convention for this company, which had 200 offices around the country. And they hadn't had a convention for 10 years. And the only place I knew was Biloxi. And so I had it down there. And ended up going back down to Biloxi and actually saw Specs again. And my wife was with me at the time, and she never believed those stories about Specs. Well, we went out, took him out to dinner, and then he invited us over to his house, and his house was just full of signed paraphernalia from Kennedy, so he was very much involved with the politics. So after I was at Safeway, I ran this convention, and it was pretty exciting. The part of the hotel that we were staying in burned down, and all the sales literature that I had created was in the part that burned down. So I had 24 hours to get with my printers and everybody and get them all reprinted and shipped back to, shipped down to Biloxi and get it ready for the convention. And it all worked out okay. And as time went on, had 4 or 5 good years with Safeway, and they had a division that manufactured playground. Their main product was scaffolding and gym seating and football field seating. And they had a little division called Everywhere Park and Playground Equipment. And because I knew quite a few people around town, they put me in charge of selling it. Well, I was putting together, organizing it, and I had just done a brochure for it. And the purchasing agent came up, and I was working on it. He said, Jake, why don't you take it? You take it. He said, you know, you can steal it. You know, you get the equipment, you got the inventory, you got everything there, and your marketing, you know that. And so I thought about it. So I decided, I think I will. So I was going to buy it. just put it in a warehouse, write a business plan, flip it, see what I can do with it. Well, I did buy it, and then all these 200 branches that we had, they found out that Jake bought everywhere. So they started selling stuff for me, so orders were coming in. And then the guy that did the engineering did all the drawings. He wanted to be my production manager. So all of a sudden I had a production manager and orders, so I had to go through with it. So then I had to find a place to put it. And I found a spot out in Economock that was owned by a friend of mine, and he let me have it for a pretty good price. So part of the deal was I had to stay at Safeway working there 3 days a week, and then work at everywhere 3 days a week. So we had that for, had everywhere for about 12 years. It was a fun business. We creating playground equipment.
So what did you do at Sailing Magazine?
Well, it was interesting. I went through an interesting interview session with them because I saw their ad in the paper that they're looking for somebody, and I called them. I said, "Who pays who?" Because I was so enthusiastic about sailing, and just to be with the Sailing Magazine, you can't get paid for that stuff. But he said, "No, we do pay." So I came in for an interview, and because of my business experience that I had and my have this terrible thing about working with numbers all the time, and so when I went in for my interview, I literally took a business plan for the magazine because it was a family-owned magazine that they'd had for about 10 years, but it was just a Lake Michigan newsletter type magazine, and they wanted somebody to turn it into a professional magazine. And so I came in with a business plan with a operating statement, balance sheet, and everything. And the guy stood up, did you get in to look at our records? How do you know this stuff? I said, I happen to know publishing, that's what I'm here for. And so it actually scared him. People don't like to hire people that know more than they do about their books. And, but eventually he did hire me. And it was basically an advertising sales job and getting on the phone and calling. I was hoping there was going to be a little bit of travel, but it was other than some sailboat shows and water boat shows. But as the world turns, I got a call from an outfit by the name of Holiday Inns International. And they wanted to put on a very prestigious sailboat regatta. And they were trying to find somebody. This gal said, "We've called dozens of people and nobody will even talk to us." And so they finally got a hold of us. And I said, "Well, we're a pretty small magazine in the sailing world, but I said, I'm ready to take a coffee break. I'll bring out my magic sheet of paper and see what I can come up with. And I'll call you back." I pulled out my magic paper, cleared my desk, had my coffee, and it just so happened that on the way to work, the Milwaukee Pro-Am golf thing was on. And so I thought, well, the sailing world has never had a Pro-Am type event. And so get some fancy sailboats and some celebrity sailors, and then invite people to come and crew for them down in the Bahamas where their hotel was. So I called them back, wrote that down. That's the idea. Here's your idea. Well, what's it going to cost? I said, I don't know. I said, you just wanted an idea. I give you an idea. Go for it. I said, we're not in that business. And so I basically hung up on her. And about a half hour later, she calls back. She says, we have some plane tickets on our way to you. We want you to come down to Memphis. and continue the thoughts. And well, let me check with my boss. So I went to check with him. I said, maybe I could sell him an ad or something. So he let me go. And I went down there and I wrote the business plan on the plane. Got down there, they got me, wined and dined me. Next morning we got into their place and what is your plan? And I told them, we have this regatta, we have to come in, we have a party, and they go sailing. And you guys take care of, or you provide the airfare for these hotshots, and and pay everything, take care of everything once the people that come to sail with them come. And you take care of myself and my family and all their expenses, including their expenses. Okay, if that's in the plan, fine. So that was it. No, that's it. So they said, well, it'll probably take about 3 or 4 months. So I get back. 2 days later, she calls, she says, do it and send us the bill. So in 6 months, including having the regatta, I had people from 42 states, 200 people from 42 states. I had all but 8 of the top sailors in the country. And then we ran an ad to see for people in our magazine, for people out of the crew. Now we had a pretty small magazine. We got over 5,000 applicants for this thing. It was, just brings me back to, going back to the childhood stuff a little bit. And high school, one of the things I learned in high school was about parties. I used to lose my driver's license quite a bit in spring. And for me to get out to the lake where I wanted to be, I had to have these buddies of mine that wanted to have a party. I said, you drive me out there and you can have a party at the house, at our cottage. Now my family never knew about this, except for one. And so the first party, there was 7 people. Next weekend, we had 30. And then it got up to about 50. And then the next year, it was up into 100. The final party was 300. So that taught me one thing, that if you're doing something that people want and you let them know, they're going to come. And so that's how I came up with the regatta thing, that you're doing something that the sailor people want to come to this thing. These 5,000 people that applied, I had a call, and the mayor came in, and we had these mail bags, all these things, and then the mayor in Port Washington came in, and then we picked the names out of the thing for who's going to go. So then I had a call to find out if they can make it, because they had to pay their own way there to the Bahamas. And I couldn't believe the stories. There's one contractor, he said, I have the biggest contract meeting in my life that week, but I'm going to cancel it. He said, I'm going to go. And that just went on like, there was people just, everyone, changed their, whatever they were doing. They were having a baby, whatever. They just, I think one even had a baby while we were there. I'm not too sure. But they all came, and then I had to get down to the Bahamas, and which I'd never been to, and never been to their place and their hotel, and I found some sailors, and it wasn't too hard to do it down the Bahamas, and told them about what we're doing, and they got all excited about it. So they'd do it. They didn't have any money to do it. Sailors never have any money. So but I said, don't worry about the money, we have money for it. But I said, they're going to then I need spectators. Now, you got anybody that knows power boats? So he said, we don't talk to people with power boats, but we know one of the guys was a doctor and knew this guy that was head of the fishing club. So he gave me a name, said, well, we'll see him. Introduced myself, and I told him what we were doing. I said, we got this regatta that we're having, and we got, famous sailors like Ted Hood and Buddy Malgus and so forth, and by the way, Walter Cronkite is going to be coming. I don't know if you guys know Walter Cronkite, but he was a very famous newscaster at that time. And so I said, we need some spectator boats. And he said, yeah, I think I can handle that. So I gave him the dates. So that was it. Talked to those sailors, talked to the fishermen, and then got back, so I had that taken care of. And the hotel I got familiar with, and getting this all organized. We didn't have fax machines, we didn't have email, it was just all phone call and letters. And we just sent out one letter, because I had a short time to do this, of instructions to everybody. And I got to tell you about the Walter Cronkite story. I'm at a boat show before we had the regatta, and boat shows were a fun thing. A lot of parties going on all the time, and one of them was one that Walter Cronkite helped me put on because he was a sailor, and I was invited to that, and I was there, and I saw him. He was just getting into an elevator, and I ran over, put my foot in the elevator, and stopped and I said, Mr. Cronkite. Introduced myself. We're having a sailing regatta called Masters Weekenders, blah, blah, blah. And we would be definitely honored if you would come and be our guest Commodore for the event. And he said, I'd love that. Great. I said, good. How do I get hold of you? He said, what do you mean? Walter Cronkite, New York, New York. And he said, that'd get to me. And so fine, I got off the elevator, he went his way. And I got a call from him. It was right during the Iranian crisis when they had these ones that were maybe going to get released and maybe weren't going to get released. And he called the night, or about a week or so before, and because he was supposed to come in on a Friday night, and he called. He said, "Jake," just like that. This is Walter Cronkite. "Jake, I'm sorry, I can't get there on Friday night. Can I still come Saturday?" And I said, "Sure." So he came, and this regatta was just, there was so much to this thing, so many events, because these after this hotel had said, okay, do it and send us the bill, my next phone call, because I needed 9 sailboat yachts, and the next call was to an outfit by the name of Tartan 10, which is a real high-class, speedy race boat. And I said, Ben, you can't believe what just happened. And I told him, and he says, Jake, I'll provide the boats. Wow, so now I get the boats. Then I had to get the sailors, and Ted Turner was the first call I made, which was my bad mistake, because I said, Jake, it sounds a little too commercial. Mind you, I was at Sailing Magazine, so I knew all these people. And so I was in trouble. So my next call, Buddy Malgus, who a lot of people don't know, but he's God when it comes to the sailing world. So I called him, and he just loved the idea. And I said, will you come and be one of the masters? And he said, I'd love to. I'm going to have to give up my Olympic status, but for that I will. Wait a minute, don't. And you're not going to do that. Let me worry about that. So I got off the phone, got a hold of some other people I knew, and got a hold of the Olympic people, and I said, I'll guarantee you 1,500 donation. We'll make it a fundraising. Yeah. And if I could have Buddy come without losing his deal. Okay. So got that done, and that's how everything just fell together. Now, all these people I only talked to once, we got down to the regatta, they all had to be there at 3:30 on Thursday afternoon because the race was started Friday. And at 3:30, everybody was there. I couldn't believe it. And the next morning we got there, they had the fishing fleet, the sailing guys had all this stuff for taking care of the boats. The fishing fleet had both. They had a $10 million yacht for Cronkite. So he go out and watch the race, and so then he came, and just to share a little bit about him. The first day he didn't make it, and it was sort of a rainy day, but we still had to race. Had fun. We were back into the hotel. And after the race and going over stuff, and I had brought in a judging team, and I had my my brother and his wife come to help with the welcoming of people. And hotel came down and said, "Mr. Cronkite is here." And so then I sent my son JF and to get him, because I was busy doing something else. So Jeff was 14 at the time, and sent him up there to get him. And he went there and knocked on the door, and Cronkite was there, and came in. He said, "Okay, I'll come down for a drink, and we just got to freshen up." So JF noticed that he had, I was with Sailing Magazine. Well, Cronkite had a sail magazine on his bed. So Jeff was smart enough that he explained to him that this is Sailing Magazine, who it was. So Cronkite anyway gets down there, and such a wonderful person, and famous person, and everybody is ooh and ah. And then my sister-in-law, Joanne, my brother's wife, said, "Mr. Cronkite, everybody wants their pictures and stuff. Can we just get that done with?" Okay.
All right, so going back a little bit, when did you first learn about Walter Cronkite?
Oh, actually, he was a very famous World War II correspondent when he became famous. And so all my life, I was during the war period, and my young life anyway. And there's a couple of stories about that. We had the wardens, they had the blackout. You know, like in Europe, they had the bombing. Well, they prepared us for that by having these blackout periods. We had to have all the lights on the house out, and the street lights out, and everything out. And they had wardens walking around making sure that you did. And you were, I don't know, you're penalized or what if you had lights on, but they were just training the people to do it. And then, but during this period, other than the fact that we bought a new home because everybody is off into the service, real estate plunged. And my folks found a new home, and at a great price of like $9,000, which was a very, very nice big house type thing. And that was pretty exciting to them. But we weren't, at least at my age, weren't that aware of the, of the war. Pearl Harbor happened to have been on my mother's birthday, and I have no real recall other than it was my mother's birthday, and that we were at war. And the closest that I got to it was my brother-in-law. My siblings were quite a bit older than I, and my sister that had her significant other, and then she married him while he was in the Marines, and he was in the Pacific part of the war. And I was around 12, I think 11 or 12, when my mother went out to California to see my sister and her husband, a Marine. And on the train, it was all people in uniforms, and just all guys, all GIs, you know. And I just, being a little kid, they just, you know, took care of me all the time. They just were having so much fun with me. And then out there, I got to see Camp Pendleton, which was in San Diego, which is where my brother-in-law was stationed, and he was a World War II hero in the Battle of Tarawa. So, and he had ended up in the hospital, but he lived through it all and was quite okay.
How did your brother-in-law affect your future plans to join the Army?
Well, he was not only a war hero, but he was my hero. He was. We were good buddies over the years, even though he was quite a bit older than I am. But when I got out of high school, as I might have mentioned that I wasn't one of the world's best students, even though I was very good in the organizing of things. I was the basketball manager of our team at Hawthorne Junior High School. We were champs for 2 years while I was manager, and then I became a swimming team manager, and under Coach Hankey, and we were champions for several years. I was only manager for 2 years, but 2 years that I was, we were champions. And one of the things I did as a manager that I was so proud of with the swimming team management and the basketball was I made the players and the team guys feel as important as they could. You know, as a manager, a lot of the things you're doing is just handing out the towels and doing stuff like that. Well, I would make towels a reward. That if they were good to me and did a good job that day, I'd give them extra towels. So I just treated them like celebrities all the time, and that was fun. But then when I got out of high school, I and several of my friends, at least a half dozen that I can think of offhand, who were also not the best students in the world. And at that time, college was a thing to aim for, but it wasn't on all of our minds like it is today. I mean, my kids, when they grew up, there was no conversation about going to school or not. You went to college, you know, that was it. But my folks only went to 8th grade, and they had a very successful business and a wonderful life, and most of their friends were in the same boat. But what I didn't want to go to college, and I wasn't qualified for any particular job. I didn't know what kind of job I wanted. So I just volunteered, found out I could volunteer for the draft. I did. And I went through training down at Fort Leonard Wood. And I had a knee injury, so I was laid up for a little bit. And then I had to go through basic training again. And then after that, I went to, they put you in these different schools. They give you these aptitude tests, and for some reason I did wonderful in carpentry. And they put me in a carpentry school. And so I did that. Then after I got out of that, they sent me to Guam. Well, I got to Guam, and which was a very empty island at that time of the world. Now it's a resort area, but at that time it was nothing. And I was assigned to a construction company that was building an airstrip for the new planes coming along. And reported to the Captain DePietro, who would never forget him, sitting behind a desk just like this, and I reported Private Price, reporting for duty, MOS 212, which is carpenter language. And he looked at me, he says, "Price, "You're no carpenter." And you sort of rocks your boat when somebody does that to you. And because I really wasn't, and I knew it, but I didn't know how he knew it. And so he says, "You know how to drive a Jeep?" I said, "Yeah, we had one at our hunting lodge." I didn't want to bring that up right then, but hunting lodge, because my first deal there was driving a Jeep for Lieutenant Canziero. And that gave me the opportunity to really learn the area, because I had, when I wasn't driving around, I'd take something off the Jeep and I'd say, "I got to go take care of this." And I'd go have coffee and then take care of that and drive around a little bit, come back. And then one day, on Guam it rained a lot. One day I came in there, a Quonset hut is what we lived in, and the office was in Quonset hut, our barracks were in just screened-in porches. And one day I came into the office, it was raining, and I just threw my wet hat up in the air, and it landed on top of the executive officer, which they had no dividers. And he says, "Price, get your ass in here. You're just too happy for being on this damn rock." He says, "You need a job with some responsibility." So the mail clerk was leaving. So he said, "You're got a new mail clerk." And this guy changed my life a little bit, because he was an older guy, but he had come from, most people were drafted at that time. I was a volunteer draft. Well, these guys pulled from all walks of life. They were drafted in. He was an older guy that was drafted in, and he was in the advertising world. And so that's how I learned about that part of it, and why I wanted to get into it. And at that time, there were 16 different people working in this office. And as they checked out, they just gave me the job. So I had 13 titles at one time, from mailman down to operations, and I had 150 people I had to keep track of, and 150 machines, not 50 machines, but cranes and Jeeps and so forth. So I had a lot of good experience, but because I was a construction person, supposedly, but I was in the office, so they wanted me to move my bunks into a different barracks. And I said, "No, I'm with the construction guys. These are my buddies. I want to stay with them." So they want to court-martial me. Well, one of the titles they had was the court-martial clerk. So every morning they'd announce at Reveille that Jake Price was going to be, or Private Price was going to be court-martialed. Well, my buddies would come up, "Do they have it?" "No." So they'd all make bets on it and blah, blah, blah. So they didn't. But after a year and a half, one guy finally pulled rank on me. 'Cause I was just a private, but I sort of ran the outfit. And because one of the officers one morning, I was in there on a Saturday morning, and they came back from battalion headquarters, and they were all upset because they tried to get 30 guys promoted. And we're working on the strip. And they did, and I said, "What happened?" "We don't really know." And the lieutenants were, well, you're all young, but they didn't know too much, I don't think. So I said, "Let me take that paperwork." So I went back up to battalion headquarters, and I had some influence up there, because I had these cranes and these equipments that I could move around for them if they needed it. So they had to listen to me, and so I got them all promoted and brought it back, and so that after that I had it made. And but finally somebody pulled rank, and I was out of it. And I only had about 3 weeks to go myself, so I checked out a Jeep and just drove around for 3 weeks until I left the island on a ship coming back. So I went in the service the same weight I am right as I'm sitting here, 270 pounds. It came out, left Guam 220, I got back to check out the service, and I checked out at 1:65. And on the shipboard, we just did nothing but eat and sleep. But I slept in an interesting place. I slept at the top of the ship between the smokestacks. And it was windy and sunny, and I think I evaporated. That's all, because I lost all that weight. So the Army was good to me. I had a lot of fun with it. I had two leaves. I went one to Hong Kong and one to Tokyo. And Tokyo, even then, was pretty civilized, crowded but civilized. Hong Kong, no, this was in 1955. One of the officers that had been there gave me the name of a tailor that they used. And you could get a cashmere suit I had made I had several made actually, for friends, $20 for a cashmere suit, handmade. These tailors met me at the plane. I had met a couple other guys at the plane. I said, "You want to come along with me?" They got a limo waiting for me. No. So I'm driving out in this limo, and I see these guys at the bus stop. I stop the driver, and I say, "Want to change your mind?" They look, okay, so they came. So they went through this tailor shop with me, and got the tour, and then tailor guy took us all to dinner. Got dates for all of us and everything. Went to a nice fancy place and everything. Got me a black market room that had hot and cold running water. And so I spent about a week and a half. I couldn't get out of there. I was hitchhiking. This is back then. There was no commercial flights that I could take. Just had a hitchhike. So I had to go out to the airstrip and try to get on a plane, and couldn't. Finally, I'm went to the Peninsula Hotel, which is a big hotel in there, very fancy place. Compared to the rest of Hong Kong, was so poor that at night people tied themselves to the railings on buildings and slept there because they were just so crowded. They slept in the cars. There was just no room. But the Peninsula was had a 7-course dinner, like for $7 or something. And I went down there, found a little bar in the basement of the hotel. And just happened, as the world goes around, ran into a couple of pilots. Excuse me. And told them my problem. I'm trying to get back to Guam. And they said, "Well, we'll get you to the Philippines." I said, "Well, that'll help." Because they're like, "So how do I get on there?" He said, "Well, go out to the airport." He said, "The bus, you'll see this stand by this bus stop. The buses stop, they have to open the door. When they open the door, just get on. Don't say anything, just get on." So, okay, so I get out there the next morning and get on this bus and get on there and goes right out onto the airstrip and get by this big plane. And realizing now that I'm on a busload of all Air Force officers. And we're getting off the bus and we're all mingling around, and this little general comes up to me, and he had 3 stars on his stuff. And I was just a specialist first class thing I was wearing. And he comes up and he says, "What is that?" Because these are Air Force and I was Army. And I explained it to him, and I said, "No, what are these?" So anyway, I got to the Philippines, and then a couple days later I was able to hitch a ride to Guam. And so that was it for my experiences there.
After your service in the Army, you left, and where were you? Let's transition a little bit to see where you on November 22nd in 1963.
well, now you're making me remember a certain date, but it sounds like something that when Kennedy was shot, which at that time I had been working at the at Price Recton as an iron worker and got laid up, and happened to be home in bed at that time when it all happened. So it was right in front of me on the TV, and when he got the news came that he got shot and all that was going on, and then Cronkite was on, and it was just something very unusual, because I mean, Kennedy was so well thought of and loved by everybody that it was, everybody knows where you were when he was shot, and I was laying in bed and watching TV. And then the next morning when, what's the guy that shot him, was on TV and at the police station, and he was shot. They saw that live when that happened. And so the whole thing was a period to live through. And then with the transition to Johnson, who was not the most friendly person to Kennedy, and so we didn't know how that was going to work, but it seemed to work out pretty good in the long run.
So after the Kennedy assassination, do you remember anything else for the MLK in '68? You remember where you were then?
For the what?
For the MLK assassination or Bobby Kennedy?
Oh, well, I remember it, but it wasn't as a focus to me, because he was running for president, and he was out in California at the time, and that he did, but I'm not that good of a history buff to remember all the dates, because for some reason, you reminded me of the riots in Milwaukee, where somewhere after that, about 5 years after that, which was what made me think of it now, but where we all had to stay home because of the riots in Milwaukee, going on, the fires and goings on. But that's, give me another one.
So let's transition back to the '90s, where you were after you just got divorced. Did you have any plans for what you wanted to do?
Well, yeah, after a divorce, it is a changing thing, and I end up down in Mobile, Alabama, just because I thought I ought to be someplace but here. And I was 55 at the time, and it's a dumb thing. You may not want to put this in there, but I realized I was 55, and my sister died at 63, your brother at 67, my father died at 65, and I said, hell, you only got 10 more years to go, Jake, so you really don't have to worry about what you want to get into. You could coast for 10 years. And so I sort of did. I started multiple businesses down there, all selling advertising of some sort. And then one of the projects that I got into, which was selling advertising to schools for post-high school schools for kids that didn't go on to college, and then I did a mailing to the high schools in the area, and I was selling advertising to that, and that took me into, it worked pretty good, so I went to Atlanta, and I got into Atlanta, and that was way different than Georgia, and I realized that I was I was, Mobile was just not the place for me, so I decided to move from Mobile to Fort Lauderdale, and then stayed with some friends there and helped them, and did odd computer jobs, helping business get computerized. And then after about a year there, a friend of mine in Madison, that his business was growing and wanted to computerize it, and computers were taking over the world at that time. And so he brought me back to Madison, and I was there for half a year, getting his business computerized. And then another friend in Milwaukee brought me back to Milwaukee to work for him, and that was another interesting little side job. He, because of my regatta that I did, he knew I was good at events, and he had a big publishing business, and he wanted, it was a farm and ranch type magazine. It was all rural type people. He had like 10 million circulation. He was a very big publisher. And he wanted to do a 6-horse hitch across the country. And that's a dumb idea. And all his staff told him it was a dumb idea. Well, after a while, I was in the process of starting a magazine called Computer Register. And so he asked me one more time if I'd do that. I said, okay, I will put my magic paper out. I did, and I wrote this business plan for a 6-horse hitch deal. Because you can only go, best rate you can do is 10 miles a day, taking a 6-horse hitch across the country in these days. I don't know how they did it in the old days, but I said, horses are going to die. You're going to have problems here, problems there. But anyway, I wrote out, got all the problems, and he just loved it, and finally did do it. And he paid me pretty handsomely for that, and that allowed me to get this magazine going, Computer Register, which was a directory of computer services in and around Milwaukee. And for a while, I had editorial. Even had some writers putting stories in there, and there was even a story in there about the internet, which didn't make any sense to me, because at that time, these people that were really into the internet were just using the C prompt, just the keyboard. There was no GUI interface for web pages or stuff. And so I finally dropped the editorial, just had the magazine, and one nice guy, some guy had an ad for someplace for web pages. So he I offered him a free ad. He showed me what a web page was. And he showed me this web page, and I said, that is akin to the discovery of fire, this internet stuff. And that changed my life. I took my 100 advertisers and I put them up on the internet right away. And I called all of them to say, I want to charge you blah, blah, blah. And these are all computer people, mind you, including Microsoft regional office. They said, nobody's going to use the internet. I couldn't figure that out. And it took me a year to figure that out. What it was, they were all at the C prompt. It was below them to use the GUI interfaces that were started at that time. Then Netscape came out, and then Microsoft came, Microsoft said nobody's going to use the internet, that office. But that was just their regional office. But the home office was coming out with this, the Internet Explorer, and about 2 or 3 months after that. And so I dabbled into doing web pages, and it worked out pretty good. And then there was a little trade show in town, a business trade show. And so I had everything in my booth that was about the internet. Well, this was in 93, 94. And nobody knew what the internet was yet. And so nobody stopped by to talk about the internet until one day they let the college kids come in. Well, the college kids came in, they all knew what the internet, so they came to my booth and said, here's this old guy that was into the internet, and they knew how to make web pages, and but they didn't know what to make. So all of a sudden I had a whole bunch of free programmers hanging around me. And so we came up with, my first one that I did was actually an eBay, because I was doing that one on the side, just publishing just a backyard publication for garage sales and so forth. And that would be good on the internet. So I tried to do that, and damn near made it. Because one guy that helped me put in my first business, that Brookfield Directory way back, was now a very important venture capitalist person. And I told him about it. And he said, Jake, I don't know how to operate a computer, much less use a damn thing. But he said, I got some people that work for me to do, so I showed it to them. They fell in love with this deal. And I had hired some programmers from Northwestern Mutual. How I got them, I don't know. I can't remember. But they did the programming for me for this eBay thing. I call it Quest and Discovery. And my friend Paul Fredericks, people came and looked at it. They loved it. And they called me and said, Jake, we're kicking you upstairs. We're going to finance it. We're going to do everything. Oh, wow. So I had it made. Next morning they called, they want one more person to see this. And okay, so it happened to be the IT guy for Wisconsin Electric. And he came over, and I got these guys back in to give a presentation. And he says, well, that's a great program. And he went back to my friends and Paul Frederick and said, Jake can do everything he said he can do, but so can anybody else. That's the nature of the internet. I mean, all these things, be it Google or eBay or any of them that are out there, somebody else can also do it. It's getting out there in marketing, getting biggest first. And that scared them off, so that was off. So I saw these programmers that I got, and then I came up with a Facebook. But not Facebook as we all know it now. It was just like it, but it was just for business to business Facebook. And we had a group to going on that, and then we got it up and running, but really didn't know what to do with it. Everything is free. We didn't have enough money to just throw it out there and do it. None of us, including myself, really knew what to do with it after that. So that one folded up, and then the next thing was that people were going to want to sell stuff on the internet. So I tried to find some software that I could go out and learn how to use and show people how to put stuff up for sale on the internet. And this was in 97, 98, and there were some with none of them, they weren't any good. So I designed one, and just so happened at the same time, I met this gal that was managing programmers at the phone company for SBA, AT&T, whatever it was at the time. And we start hanging out together, and then she was retiring. So she retired, and so we decided to go into business together, and we hired a programmer, and she talked to the programmer, and I talked to her, and we made this very involved e-commerce engine, which allowed people to set up a shopping cart within a day's time with up to 5,000 or 30,000 items if they wanted, all by themselves. As a real simple thing, and very, it grew bigger and bigger as what it did for shipping. So you could calculate stuff by the ounce for shipping cost and so forth. And we got our first client on this thing happened to be Christina Aguilera. They were selling T-shirts. And then that's got us into ad agencies that were selling jackets with logos on. So that became a real soft market. Now at that time, I'm in my 60s at that time. We then had a couple of manufacturing outfits that were using it, and then we got Harkin Marine that I knew from the sailing world, and he already had one for his stuff, but he said, "You want to bid on our international one?" Because they had plants in 40 countries. And sure. So we had this thing, and the programmer and I think the programmer really came up with this one. I don't know how much you guys know about, or you people that are watching this know about computers, but you have on these shopping carts and everything, you have these fields where you put your name in and so forth, and there's going to be special names go here, or numbers go here. Well, what we came up with is that we changed all these fields to global fields, so you could put anything you want in those fields. So now we went out and gave a presentation. We had 2 weeks to figure this out. Went out there, and we showed them that now you could put this in here, and we made one in English. That was all their stuff that we'd take. They sent us their database so we could put that in there. And I said, now you can go through there, and I had my wife or somebody that went in there and I'll put it in a different language. And I just, wow. And we got an immediate nice, $20,000 check right then. So that was, so we had that going for quite a while. But my wife got hired back at the phone company, and my programmer got a good, bigger job, and I just didn't want to take the time to learn any more of the technology. Technology was changing so much that I just milked it, because now I had nobody to pay, but I had income. So I milked that for about 5 years of having a very nice income, and all I had to do was keep that damn computer running. Finally, my client said, "Jake, you're too old, and your computers are too old, so we're getting out of here." And then and that takes me up to about 6 years ago, and then I wondering what to do with myself to augment my Social Security, and people have been kidding me about my numbers all my life. Like one-page accounting, I had my accounting system that I developed. So that's what I've been working on, is trying to get that further developed and go in a cloud-based accounting system. So that's still going. Now, 10 years from now, you can interview me and find out how that happens.